Welcome to a new episode of CIELO FALSO. This is episode 6, season 3, 6th of November 2019. We are in the midst of a social and political crisis, and we are accompanied by very good friends, friends that came from different parts of the world to be part of a festival, it's Santiago Festival, that was cancelled because of the obvious political conditions. But we didn't want that to stop us from talking and to think about how art, sound, space, architecture, and politics can come together through creative practices. So today we are talking with Mark Harwood. Hi, Mark.
Hi.
And the idea is to have a very loose conversation, starting from your work and how that can relate with broader aspects of arts, politics, and the not only local but also international crisis we are in the middle of. So the other point of departure for this, it's also that we are working in a faculty that has different careers. We work with architecture, graphic design, animation graphics, and building. So our approach towards sound and art is interdisciplinary. And I think in that context we need to share some concepts, what the meaning of some words for you is different than the meaning of some words for me. Mm-hmm. So I will love if we can start from a very general conversation, getting to know your work, and then go into more specific aspects of this relationship.
Cool. I guess I come from what is formulated as experimental music, which I've been involved with for decades in various platforms. I had a record shop in Australia distributing experimental music, and I run a record label in London, and then I started recording, and then I started performing. I guess the attraction to experimental music is that it was subversive to a degree, and it works within this underground kind of platform outside of mainstream commercial channels, and because it works below mainstream, it allows the freedom to express pretty much anything. That all radical activity, authentic radical activity, can occur when capitalism owns it. So I was always way more comfortable in this thing underneath. You don't play concerts to 5,000 people, you don't end up on national television, but strangely enough, you get invited to places like South America to play concerts because the underground network works internationally. And I have friends in Santiago, and we know each other purely through our interest in experimental music. And that kind of when I first got involved in my early 20s, I'm 47 now, it was no internet, and I was ordering records through the mail, through letters and ordering. And I became friends with people in Wiesbaden in Germany and Seattle in America and all over the world just from writing letters, because you have this common interest. And I find that kind of community after the internet has only got wider and stronger. And that's how I know about the music from Chile today, experimental underground music. And the kind of network building aspect of this art form and the ability for it to have any kind of radical nature is the only way I really know how to live. I can't stand that other stuff. and it is cross-disciplinary because I know artists, I know architects, I know performance artists, I know various people in multiple disciplines who, although they're working with different practice, the underlying approach and themes all correlate with each other. The end result may look or sound or be different, but what holds it together I find to be exactly the same, and I find that to be very, very strong. I collaborate with visual artists and filmmakers, and that only occurs because of this underlying philosophy behind it all.
And on the one hand, you have this underground as something that is in a position to mainstream, being mainstream the industry level of production of the arts. But you can also think of interdisciplinary or even transdisciplinary spaces as some kind of underground, no? In terms that it shares the same freedoms to create new spaces, to create new languages, to create new artistic expressions.
Yeah, and it's also that thing that things are always evolving, and you can see that in society. You know, the world that I live in now, that wasn't the world that I was brought up in, that wasn't the world 15 years ago. And mainstream kind of culture has to rinse an idea until it's completely saturated of financial capability, and then it'll find something else to destroy, whether it's Joy Division or the Velvet Underground. It's the next thing that was once subversive that is totally annihilated. But because you're in this position, you have the ability to actually do things spontaneously in the now. You know, something which is absolutely radical and absolutely contemporary at this exact point in time. So that thing works so slow, you know, and that's also what I don't like about it, is because I'm always, you know, we're all kind of thinking and moving all the time and adapting to this world, like what's happening here right now. And that I find way more appealing than just having the same idea reiterated for 2 decades, which a lot of people actually live through, especially those who watch mainstream television, like my mother, pity her.
Yeah, and especially in this context, when the future of the ability to predict or to program something, it's more difficult each time.
I think this is the problem, is that there's the state, and when I talk about the state, I'm talking about the government, but the status quo, like your Facebooks, like your commercial businesses and your banks, it's all trying to get control to ensure that there's no rupture to this thing, that it's all totally secure by reiterating the form, it's completely stable scenario. And we see here in the last 2 weeks that just doesn't work. It simply doesn't work. And the kind of the brutal measures that are implied on the people in order to keep that status quo have just been pushed too far here, and that's why people have reacted in this way. It's like we were saying earlier, the situation in Chile at the moment isn't unique to this country. The problems in this country and the reaction's been incredible because the problems are universal for people that are living in these kind of Western liberal democracies. We all encounter the same problems of privatization of the country's assets and the money being distributed to a small amount of people while the rest of the people. These are all very common problems. It's just that whether it's an experiment or whatever happened here, they really pushed it so far that the public had to react. The public had to do something. And friends of mine have been saying, it's like everybody's been saying that I'm really lucky to be here at the moment, which is true. But the other thing is that I've had quite a few friends saying, you're looking at the future, you're witnessing the future, being that this is in some way a precedent for what's going to occur. We see problems in Lebanon, we see problems in Hong Kong, but I think the framing of what's going on here is universal to the West, and this is quite possibly the start of something that will have a domino effect throughout time in the near future.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's this image, I don't know if you have seen them, of Naomi Klein with this text, that says, neoliberalism started in Chile and it will die there. I really like that idea because it also allows us to think of this concept of imagining the death of capitalism. I think this maybe this is how it looks, how it starts looking like something. But on the other hand, it's also very difficult to assure, to have confidence on that something is going to change, and thinking of this relationship between underground and mainstream in the musical, in the arts, in the industry. I think it works totally different with politics, because if we go to Adorno, for example, when he says that cultural industry, it's always going to co-opt that is distant, that is different. Our politicians are not necessarily co-opting the things that the people are telling them that are important, so they seem to work in a totally different way.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's what's kind of people are, I guess some of the world was shocked what happened here, But I mean, it was surprising because everybody told me 2 Thursdays ago it was completely normal, and it shows how fragile the thing can be. But there is, like, certainly I've lived in Australia and I've lived in the United Kingdom, and both of those kind of, the way it operates and the power operates is that you can't really see an end to it. That it gives this, you know, I think Zizek says this facade of like infinity, that you can't picture the collapse of capitalism, you can't picture the collapse of Western democracies. And I think what happened here is it's really for the first time that you can picture it. Oh right, this can happen, and this is how it happens. And how it happens is this kind of like, the thing I've loved a lot about being here is like, it was very angry. It was initially very angry, and there's a lot of destruction, and of course the media uses that as a propaganda tool. But the reason they were so angry is because you got pushed so far. But when I went to the marches, I loved how euphoric it was, how everybody was insanely happy. And they were happy because they've found the change. They've found a way to rupture this machine, this tool. And so the joy that came out of that. And so you've got this combination of like anger, euphoria, and utter chaos, because you don't know what's next. You absolutely don't know what's next. But that's irrelevant, because it just something needed to happen. Just something needed to happen. So people are maybe a little bit like pensive about the future, but they're just happy that something's happened. It's like being trapped in a monstrous family where you can't leave the house, decade after decade after decade, and then suddenly the window's broken and you can go outside. So the feeling here is incredible.
What do you think the role of art is in that context?
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing, like, so with my performances, I guess my recordings are different, but with my performances, I usually do it as kind of like a improvised, spontaneous performance relating to the environment that I'm operating in and events that have happened to me in that day, or things that are in my mind. So I'm kind of spewing out things in my subconscious, and you know, sometimes it's a funny show, sometimes it's sort of entertaining, sometimes people get freaked out. I've played concerts where people are a little bit shocked and they can't talk. What's happened here is this absolutely enormous version of this idea of improvising life. And I was shocked at how musical it is here. All of the civil uprising is incredibly angry, insanely serious. I've never seen that many people looking so serious in my life. Like, the serious intent on the tens of thousands of people's face was incredible. And I know it's a South American thing, and you have to explain it more to my friends, but the musicality of it, the just like day and night for a week, is like, this is an enormous artwork. It's an artwork, it's an enormous performance, and it's based on reality. It's just the most honest artwork imaginable. Every artwork tries to project something, reinterpret something, you know, reconfigure something. But the spontaneity of this artwork, with pretty much the entire country except for the government involved, is definitely one of the most overwhelming things I've ever experienced. I can't perform in this country because it's completely irrelevant now, and that's fine. Every single person is in this together and active with each other. The only people who aren't are the police and the army and the state, who are just being wildly violent to their own citizens, which is making the performance even better. It's a spectacle.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of talk, you know, and research on Latin American art and how it relates to protests and to dissidents, and I'm sure it's not only a local thing, you know, how these manifestations, these public manifestations have an arsenal of their own, you know, and sound is one very important aspect of it. It's pretty amazing how all the really it's a strategy to disrupt, yes, yeah. The day-to-day life. You know, it changes the weather, it changes your feeling, it changes the way in which you wake up each day. You know, and to these aesthetic manifestations to have that potential, I think it also opens a question about art as a tool for a political imagination. because when we look at, when we can picture the end of something, you know, we have a whole future to redraw.
Sí.
You know, and I think that also, and that's another dimension, you know, of the things that we do.
Yeah, I mean, I think because it is so serious here, and that you're not going to stop with, you know, the president changing the cabinet or not raising the metro fares. That, you know, as soon as I got here, everybody told me that the one thing they wanted was a change to the constitution. So absolutely, it's not going to stop until that occurs. And what you're doing by requesting a change in the constitution is asking for complete change. So there's destruction here, but the destruction is in order to flatten it, in order to rebuild. And that's you know, it's an incredibly bold undertaking. And I guess everybody knows that it's going to take a long time, but everybody's absolutely committed to change, to starting again, to having a tabula rasa. With regarding the improvising aspect of it all, I liked what Finn said last night about they were cutting down traffic lights throughout the streets, amongst many other wonderful activities. But Finn was saying that by cutting down the traffic lights, there's no cars on the streets, you're opening up the spaces to the public again. Once the traffic light falls over, somebody's got a hammer or a metal bar, and that becomes an instrument. So the entire society has become this political artistic weapon at the moment, and it's being done, again, completely spontaneously in the most remarkable way. You've changed the urban landscape. Immediately, the architecture's changed. There's more graffiti in this city than I've ever seen in my life. All of it is embedded with an artistic intent, a political artistic intent. Nobody has the luxury to entertain anybody at the moment. You know, when you live in this facade of like stability, then you can entertain people. But like I said, the seriousness and every kind of gesture that people are undertaking has a purpose, has a political undertone to it. Every single thing that people are doing at the moment has this wonderful political undertone. United.
Yeah, and I know these are maybe two very different things, but do you see some of these manifestations in relationship with the Brexit process? You know, or again, how the Brexit has manifested in public spaces or in creative communities in the UK?
I mean, that's a hard one because they're completely different. Because the Brexit referendum was a number of years ago now, so it's been this kind of really abstract, prolonged process where it doesn't seem real, and because it was so long ago and nothing has happened. Like, since the referendum to this very day, there's been absolutely no change. So there is public resistance to it and there's protest, but I think there's an enormous difference, is that there are people that are pro leaving the European Union, and there's a lot of people in that country that want to leave the European Union, which I understand. The people that don't live in London or maybe Scotland, then they are feeling left out because all of the money and all of the focus is on London, and they're just feeling they've got no future, and they blame that on the European Union. So there's kind of two sides to the argument regarding Brexit. I mean, of course, myself and all of my friends, we don't want to leave the European Union. We find it completely inane to suggest that. The situation here is that there's no opposition. The only opposition is this tiny little government you've got now. From what I see, the whole country agrees. The vast majority of the country agrees with this one thing. So there are a lot of problems in Western democracies which are really starting to surface now. Obviously the far right and the effects of neoliberal policies in the 80s in the United Kingdom is making it very difficult for people to sustain their lives. But I don't know if it's a South American thing, but the kind of like the physical demand for change would not occur at this point from what I know in the United Kingdom. You're on the streets and you're holding placards and you're being heard, but the kind of violent demand for change I can't foresee at this point, but maybe it will happen.
If we could do like a improvisational state of the art of current revolutions, you know, there's a lot of different futures that are possible for all of this. You know, we are here now, but Iraq, Lebanon, Bolivia, I mean, there's a lot of different things that are also happening.
Yeah, I like the idea that it's, you know, because last week, like, everything was closed generally and nothing was operating besides some restaurants and bars. People need their pisco. But now you see it operating. Like, I went out yesterday and I got on the metro and we went to a museum, and I went into the square, and it was like, all right, so it's operating now in tandem with the protests. And I think that's actually healthy, because last week friends were concerned that, oh, I hope it doesn't just die off and get washed away. I mean, there's no way that'll happen, but you have to still have this functioning part. You have to have a balance between your survival, paying your rent, fighting the status quo. And that's kind of working itself out now. And then, like, a friend of mine's an architect, and said that his business partner, they were gathering together and really discussing how to start things again, where to go from now. And they came up with 5 proposals, and everybody in the department had to choose one of the proposals, and they went off and worked out 5 different potential futures, and then that's brought to the table, and then they discussed that, and then there's a proposal for something new. So, you know, I don't know a lot of this stuff, and obviously the local people are going to be much better at talking about it. But seeing this kind of like radical intervention, and then this kind of slowing down, rethinking, and now restructuring something from a very base level is just the most incredible thing. It's, you know, it's going to take a long time, but it's worth taking a long time. It has to be thought in this kind of, slippery way, where it moves around weirdly, because the government can't move around. They just send in this big monstrous tank that's really like a dinosaur that sprays tear gas. You just move around. It's this thing in Hong Kong where their motto is be water, be liquid, just be salubrious throughout the society, and create these networks which are jumping around slowly like liquid. It's a Deleuzian concept as well, of the where they were fighting the troops, the military in Israel in the 70s were informed to walk through walls and all this, you know, this kind of thing. And the tactical approach at this point is like, you've started the fire will go out a bit, and then you start little fires everywhere around, something like this, you know. But because everybody's involved, and the only way forward is to do it like that. And I think it kind of happens organically, naturally, like everything that's going on here. I find it a very organic process, including the rage, including the protest, including the situation now.
It's interesting because if we go to the beginning of the conversation, and this idea of underground being a space for improvisation, for acting quickly, for recording things that are happening in the now. You know, I think that may be also a strategy that our political demands are performing in the streets. You know, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And on the other hand, you have the government, as you say, with this huge machine that is very slow.
Yeah.
You know, it takes a lot of time to actually make changes. You know? So to find a space in between,
yes.
You know, which these two schedules can sometimes work together. I think it's maybe one of the great challenges, you know, for this to be also socially sustainable.
Yeah. I like that it's like, we keep talking about it as a performance, but it is a performance. It's like, prior to this, what they want is for you to just shop, eat, go home, and do not perform. Be in a public space with your children, with your friends, and go home. Don't do anything in that space. But now everybody's doing something in that space, which is their worst nightmare. Everybody's performing. They don't want anyone to perform unless it's an artist playing to 10,000 people and making lots of money. But now everybody's performing, and they must be terrified.
Yes.
I hope.
Well, it's been great to talk with you.
Thank you so much.
There's a lot of ideas, you know, in this moment that
Exciting
we are. So
times.
I hope we just we're able to grasp some of those concepts. So
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being up with us.
Excellent.